Welcome to our session on constructors and destructors. So in this session, we'll be discussing about constructors, what are constructors, how to create constructors, what are the types of constructors, and constructors follows two methods, that is shallow copy and deep copy mechanism. What are destructors and what are the rules for destructors? Constructors are member functions of a class which initializes the objects of a class. It has same name as that of the class and they do not return any value. Constructors are automatically called when an object is created. Constructors in C++ are of three types: default constructors, parameterized constructors, and copy constructors. Default constructors are those constructors which do not take any arguments. Parameterized constructors takes arguments and copy constructors takes arguments which are a reference of the class. Let's look into default constructor first. Default constructor do not accept any parameters, and these are those constructors which gets added automatically by the compiler if the user or programmer is not adding one. Let's implement a default constructor through a program and understand elements of the class public. Now let me add a data member, say ID. The student ID is a member of the class. Now, so we cannot initialize the data member directly here. I cannot write a statement like this. So to initialize the data members of your class, we make use of constructors. So constructor should have the same name as that of the class. Now since we are working with default constructor, your constructor cannot take any arguments. Now within this constructor, I will initialize the data member of my class. Now let me add one more member function. Say I have a display function here within the class. And let me print the data member value. Say student ID. Now, how do you invoke your class? You have to create an object to the class. So, when I say student obj, obj is an object to the class. So, whenever you create an object, at that instant, your constructor will be invoked. Or I can say the constructor gets called automatically by the compiler whenever you create an object to the class. So if constructor is getting called, what is happening? My data member ID will be initialized with a value 90. So after this statement, if you make a call to the display function, obj.display, you can see that it will display the ID value as 90. Let's verify this. Yes, you can see your output. It is printing student ID equal to 90. So, constructors are used to initialize the data members of your class and they get called automatically by the compiler whenever you create an object to the class. Now, we have seen one more point with default constructor. If the programmer is not adding a default constructor to the class, the compiler automatically adds a default constructor. Let's verify that. That is, I'm removing this default constructor from my class. So now, if you look, there are no constructor in the class. Let me build and run this program. Your program works fine. Only problem is your ID, that is the data member, is ending up with some garbage value. So from this you can understand that the compiler is automatically adding a default constructor to your class, because of which only the data member ID is initialized with some value. Only thing is it is a garbage value or a junk value. So to avoid the data members being initialized with some garbage values or junk values, it is always a good practice to add a constructor to your class. Parameterized constructors are those constructors which takes arguments or receive parameters. Let's implement the parameterized constructor and check our output. Class student, and now I'm going to add a parameterized constructor to my class. So since it is a constructor, it should have the same name as that of the class and there should not be any return type for your function. Now since this is a parameterized constructor, it has the privilege to take argument. Now I have only one data member here, so I will take, or my parameterized constructor will take only one argument. Now what is the role of this constructor? To initialize the data member of the class. So I will initialize id with x, that is the argument to my parameterized constructor. Now when is your constructor getting invoked or called? Let it be any constructor, it gets invoked the moment you create an object to the class. So if it is a parameterized constructor, you have to pass the arguments whenever you create an object. So if I pass 34 here, at this moment this 34 gets passed and it will receive by x. So id equal to x means the data member id will be initialized with a value 34, which you have passed whenever you create your object. Let's verify this output. Yes, you can see your output here, student ID 34. So this is how you work with parameterized constructors.